Hello, and welcome back to the Battle Frontier podcast, where we aim to help you level up in your journey as a competitive Pokemon TCG player. I'm Aaron Curry, here with me as always with my co-host John Orgel. And this week, we're going to go through a time capsule of a deck from a very specific era, and we'll talk a little bit more about why we chose that era when we get to it, before we jump into the multitude of tournaments that happened over this past weekend and highlight some decks from those events before we hit up our Blaine's quiz show for the week and close things out with a not post-mortem tier list, because we do still have a couple more events in this format, but a more experienced tier list, I guess one could say, heading into Portland Regionals this coming weekend as the last North American Regionals before NAIC. So with all that being said, before we get into our time capsule, I want to know, what were you up to this weekend, John?
I had a really busy weekend judging tournaments. I judged a League Cup Saturday. I judged a League Cup Sunday. And then I judged my pre-release at my store on Monday. And Saturday was pretty uneventful. Sunday, though, I got, on my way over to the store, I got a call from the store owner. And he basically said, we don't have power. So I had to figure out, one, am I still going to run this event? And I said, all right, we'll just be delayed a little bit because it'll take some extra time to get everybody in the computer and get the store situated. But we were able to, thankfully the store has nice big bay windows. Well, not bay windows, but big windows. And we were able to play with just the natural sunlight coming in from the windows. We only had, I think, 12 players total. So that helped.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd be able to do it because I wasn't able to print anything out. So I had to basically go from table to table as soon as I saw the matches finishing up and get them to report their match before they had picked up their cards.
Sure.
Write it all down, enter it in the computer, and then okay, here, everybody come gather around my computer and see where you're sitting for, or I just read off, I think, where people were sitting for the next round. And that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
And people were really nice. I gave out extra prize packs to
Nice.
just kind of ease the pain. Yeah. So it was fine. Other than I still had enough for a top four, so I stayed. The power came back on right before the round 3 ended out of the 4 rounds of Swiss, so we were able to finish. And the kitchen, it's a board game cafe, so that we were able to get the kitchen fired up and get people some lunch. So that was nice. That helped a lot too.
Yeah.
And thankfully it wasn't too hot out yet in Virginia, where it's still 65, 70 most days.
I was going to say, I can't imagine going to a tournament with no power.
Dude, yeah, in Florida, no. Yeah, you guys would have to reschedule unless it was February or something.
Right.
But no, it was pretty. The vibes were kind of chill. It's the quietest I've ever had a tournament be. Because there was no music playing. Usually there's music playing because it's a restaurant.
Okay.
But this one was just and there was no other patrons because the restaurant was closed,
right,
since they didn't have a kitchen open. So it was literally just the League Cup, the 12 players playing in the League Cup. And so once the round started and everybody's just playing their game, it's super quiet. And I'm just this is like a library. This is crazy. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, I didn't do too much otherwise. Me and Cindy had some friends over for dinner one night and just kind of hung out. Stayed in Richmond. So kind of nice, relaxing weekend other than having to run a bunch of Pokemon events.
How'd your pre-release go? Was it did it sell out?
We initially sold out of pre-registration slots, but then we had 6 people not show up last minute.
Okay.
So, but we still had 26 out of the 32 registered.
Nice.
Came in play. So yeah, pretty good. And it worked out because for whatever reason, we had 32 pre-registration slots and only 30 kits. 30 building battles, so we would have had we had a contingency plan for if we did have everybody show up, but thankfully it didn't come to that, so we were able to not worry about that too much. Yeah, it was good. How about you? How did you do? Did you go to any pre-releases or go to any more tournaments or just do baseball stuff all weekend?
Definitely did baseball stuff all weekend.
Yeah, I figured.
Went to 2 different tournaments, so one for Pokemon, one for not Pokemon.
Okay.
On Friday, went to a League Cup that unfortunately we had 8 people, which is 1 below the threshold needed for top 4.
Yeah.
And so just a 3-round, basically a league challenge for League Cup points, and played The same EV list. I wanted to make a couple of swaps, but the tournament started at 5 p.m. on Friday, so I barely had
Ooh,
time to get there after work, and had
that's
forgotten
brutal.
to. I know. I had forgotten to change the like two cards that I wanted to for my list from last weekend, and just ended up rocking the same 60. Started out 2-0, and then in round three played against Dragapult, and you know it. To anybody that understands Pokemon, you would know that I had the game totally locked up, and realistically, I didn't want, obviously not, I'm not going to pressure my opponent into giving me the win, but my opponent was dead by all measures. Two Dreepies were in the discard pile. Had no recovery cards left, no Poffins left. Had already used his rare candy and his sparkling crystal. He's got one Dreepy on board, and I've got a Sylveon that's able to either KO that Dreepy that turn or just send it back to the deck, and he has no way to get it out.
Hmm.
So, but he's just like, okay, well, we'll just take the tie, and I'm like, okay, well, that is what it is. And I lost on opponent's resistance. It was a really weird circumstance. So both of my previous opponents were playing each other at table two. Both of my round three previous opponents, were playing each other at table three. So all four of those individuals going into round three were 1-1 and playing each other. So the outcome of the event depended entirely upon the fourth table of players who neither of us at table one had played against, and it was I lost on opponent's resistance by like 0.2% or
That's
0.02% or something
so
really silly.
scuffed.
And so unfortunately, I walked away second place from that event.
Did the guy you tied with in the last round get first?
Yeah, yeah. It was just
Yeah.
so
Ugh,
there was no other.
that
One of the
sucks.
two of us was going to win, and
Yeah,
I feel like if I'd had, I mean, maybe at some point that's kind of on me. Like I probably could have made my decisions a little bit
sure.
faster. I don't know how many more turns I would have needed to really seal things up, but I was just trying to be cautious, and maybe I could have been a little bit more aggressive, and it would have been okay. So you kind of live and learn. It puts me at that 620 bracket, which is, yeah, I think I'm tied with like six other people, like right outside of what is currently the bottom of top quote unquote 125. So NAIC is going to be a really big deal for a lot of people, and I'm sure
Yeah.
that everyone really has a lot riding on that.
Do you have
But
a
yeah,
goal set for NAIC at this point?
I think if my goal is just to qualify for Worlds, then my goal at NAIC is just to make day two.
Okay.
Like make day two, and I should solidly be qualified for Worlds.
Okay.
But I would really love to make top 32 minimum at NAIC is what I would
Sure.
like
It's
to
like a
shoot for.
stretch goal.
Yeah. But yeah, and so after that, little disappointed going home Friday night, but it is what it is. Nothing I can do to change about it. So I had to
Hmm.
change my mindset and everything, and head into Saturday and Sunday doing a baseball tournament for my son's travel team. And we played two games Saturday in the 95 plus degree Florida sun. Our games were at like noon and 2 on Saturday, and so that was pretty miserable. No clouds in the sky, Florida humidity.
This is May, dude. Like,
It was.
I don't know why anybody lives in Florida.
I mean, it's actually pretty
uh,
decent baseball weather, all things considered. Other
I
than it being a
mean,
little hot. I mean, the kids
what are
were
you gonna
definitely
tell yourself?
the kids were dead by the end of game two.
Yeah, of course.
By the end of the second game, so
Dehydrated.
we went 1-1 on that. Like we won our first
Okay.
game, I think like 13-6, and then lost our second game 0-4. And
Hmm.
so headed into that still qualified us. I think that there were 10 or no 8 teams in that tournament as well, and so that qualified us for the gold bracket because we were fourth seed going into the second day of games, and so we had to show up bright and early again at 9 a.m. for our first game on Sunday. And unfortunately, we lost both of our games Sunday and ended up coming
Okay.
solidly in fourth place. But the kids, you could just tell they were just totally shot. I mean, so our team, for anybody listening, is a bunch of 7 and 8 year olds. So asking them to play 4 baseball games over the course of a weekend in 90 plus degree weather it's a lot. And that's why going into the fall and everything, our current head coach has the idea that we're going to start having the kids do a little bit of strength and conditioning to be more able to handle tournament series as we go forward, and just getting them all prepped for that. And it's something that if you're a serious competitor, you've got to do the prep work you need to do. The same thing for sports, Pokemon, whatever it is that you're trying to compete in. You need to have yourself prepared to go all the way in whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's tough though. Like I can't imagine being a 7-year-old and just trying to like run around in the Florida heat. Like it's got it because you don't really sweat like an adult, where your body really cools off as well as effective.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Before
we
before
had
puberty.
we had like 4 DeWalt fans like hung up in the
Yeah,
dugout, and we had cooling towels for all the kids and everything. But enough
you
about
do the
base.
best you can.
Enough
Yeah,
about
sorry.
baseball. No,
sweaty,
after
sweaty.
after that we
We'll
so
move on to other sweaty topics.
for real. So yeah, one of the other sweaty things that happened was yesterday. Store registration for the NAIC Pokemon
Oh
Center
yeah,
opened up, and it was kind of a weird circumstance. I don't think anybody knew that it was happening yesterday until suddenly everyone just random. You got an email, and you don't even know when the email was coming because it didn't come to everyone at the same time. And they said, "Okay, go sign up." And so, as a part of that, I was able to get a store slot for Friday at like 10, I think, or 10:15, somewhere around there. And I'm pretty sure for competitors, they're going to allow us some flexibility because obviously that's in the middle of day one for NAIC, and or probably like round 2 or 3, honestly.
yeah,
I feel like we'd have to, have some amount of leeway where we could either come a little early or be late up to a point and kind of hopefully be fast tracked in as over, not to say that we're better than spectators, but our time is a little bit more limited
right.
than
Like you're
someone who,
competing in an event,
right.
so
So
it's different.
hopefully some small allowances can be made for competitors to ease the process. Otherwise, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to go,
Right.
unfortunately.
Sure. Yeah, and the nice thing about being a professor, like a judge for this event, we do get a reserve spot for the Pokemon Center, so that makes you feel good. Like the fact that I don't have to sit in that queue and stress out about it. They email us with just, hey, you're going at this time on this day,
Oh,
and so I'm
nice.
going Wednesday at like 1 p.m. So pretty early on, which is
Yeah.
nice too.
Yeah. So you'll actually have a
Um,
shot at the exclusive stuff too, which, I mean,
Ideally, yeah.
for
I got a good
NAIC,
amount. Yeah, I got a good amount for at EUIC.
sure.
Like I got, I had a friend who wanted a bunch of stuff, so I got him like a backpack, and I got whatever else. I don't know.
You got all your the Psyduck stuff too, right?
Yeah, I got the hat, and I think that's about all I really got. Because there was a sweater, but I didn't get that.
Sure.
But yeah, I got a couple things. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to see what they have. I got like a really cool backpack. I think that was EU exclusive for. I don't think it was exclusive for EUIC. I think it was just Pokemon Center EU exclusive.
Oh, okay.
So that's like my gym bag now. So
Nice.
it gets used twice a year. So that's nice.
See, like that's one thing. I almost didn't want to even sign up for a store slot to begin with because the NAIC specific merchandise, the Cornerstone Ogerpon stuff, is something that I care next to nothing about. I hate Cornerstone Ogerpon. It's probably my least favorite Ogerpon. I was talking about this before we started recording, where I don't have a favorite Ogerpon, so I can't. And honestly, I probably couldn't rank the other 3 relative to each other, but I know that Cornerstone is number 4.
Yeah, I think the competitor kit comes with a hat with Cornerstone, and I think
Okay,
your mat has a Cornerstone on it.
right,
But I think
right.
that's about the bulk of the Cornerstone stuff. I don't like most of the stuff at the store that's event exclusive is Teal Mask themed.
Oh, I
So
thought the deck
like,
box had the mask on it, or whichever like event exclusive mask too.
do I still have one? Let me see if I have one real quick.
Sure.
This was, I think, the competitor deck box. So this one does have
Okay.
Wellspring
Yeah.
for Europe. So yeah,
So
I guess it will be.
we're gonna get a crappy
Cornerstone.
Cornerstone.
Yeah, you'll get for your competitor kit
I'm
with
so
like the sleeves.
I am so disappointed.
Yeah, I mean,
but
I don't know.
I don't know. Somebody out there loves Cornerstone Ogerpon,
For
and
sure.
this will be a great experience for them. They are not me. But there are some other cool things happening at NAIC that got announced this week, including a full list of side events. And we saw that, scanning through, there are things including Expanded, GLC, Pokemon Pocket, a couple of the various Professor Cup formats that have been featured, I believe, are included. And one of the other really highlight ones is there is an official retro side event happening at NAIC this year. And specifically, it is the 2010 or Diamond Pearl through Heart Gold Soul Silver Unleashed format. No. Yeah, it is Diamond Pearl. Okay. Okay.
Is
And
it Heart
so,
Gold Soul Silver Unleashed all the way up to that?
yep. Yeah. So
Oh,
the
nice.
Nationals and Worlds format from 2010. And unfortunately, I do not believe they're allowing proxies for this event. But I think I'd have to go back and look at it. But I think World Championship cards might be okay. So it's not. It's going to be something where there might be a little bit of an accessibility issue for some people. But if you have been collecting retro cards or are interested in retro formats, I would definitely take the time to sign up for this if it is something you're interested in. It is happening on Sunday at, I believe we said it was 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. So if specifically if you are not in the finals of whatever category of event you are participating in, you should be able to sign up for this if you are at all interested. It's not going to be crazy. It's a 3-round event for prize tickets, but I assume afterwards people who are participating would be more than willing to stick around and continue to play games in that format. And there will more than likely be some other unofficial retro events that get kind of coordinated. But that's as good of a segue as I have as any to jump into the time capsule this week. So John and I agreed that in the time between now and NAIC, we're going to feature exclusively 2010 decks on our time capsule segment to coincide with that retro event. And so the first one I want to bring up here is a deck that is somewhat near and dear to my heart. It is Sablelock, and this is a deck, not this list in particular. This list belongs to Conley, who won nationals and I believe also made top 16 at Worlds that year with very similar lists. But this is a concept that was originally premiered by myself and Steven Silvestro at Florida State in this same year. So a few cards got added to the format after that, but for the most part, the concept stayed relatively similar. So some of the most important things about this deck, the kind of namesake of the deck, you've got Sableye from Stormfront here. Well, that didn't work. Sableye with its Overeager Pokebody that says if Sableye is your active Pokemon at the beginning of the game, you go first. But if both players open with Sableye with Overeager, then the power does nothing and you rely instead on the die roll / coin flip to decide who goes first. And in the Diamond Pearl format is where we were first introduced to these energyless attacks, and Sableye possessed one of them in the form of Impersonate that allowed you to search your deck for a supporter and discard it. You shuffle your deck afterward and then use the effect of the supporter as the effect of this attack. And so there are a few combos for this in this deck, but before we get off of Sableye, it also one of the most well-known portions of this card, and the reason that it eventually ended up getting banned was the overconfident. Well, really, it's kind of a combination of overeager and overconfident. But overconfident was an attack for 1 dark energy, did 10 damage, and if the defending Pokemon had fewer remaining HP than Sableye, the attack's base damage is 40. And so the reason that this is important is there were a number of HP modifiers for your opponent's side of the board or ways to do damage outside of your attack. One of the big ones being Crobat G that we can go back and look at. The deck was an SP based deck, so we had access to Crobat G with its Flash Bite Poke Power. Every time you put it down, you could put a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if you open with Sableye and your opponent opened with a Pokemon that had a number of HP that you could get down to 50, your overconfident would go up to a base damage of 40, and with a special dark on your Sableye, you would do 50 damage and knock it out in one turn. So you did have a donk capability in the deck, or a donk mode per se, but one of the scary combos of the deck was utilizing Cyrus Initiative going first while using Sableye. And so this was a format where you could play supporters going first. So really, I'll take one step back real quick and we'll come back to Cyrus's initiative. One of the big mean combos and the way that you would lock people out of games was go first with due to your overeager Pokebody, slap a judge down on the table to put both players at 4 cards, and then impersonate Cyrus's initiative, which is a card that outside of this deck saw 0 play whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But when used in conjunction with Sableye and other means of controlling your opponent's hand, this was a very powerful supporter. So Cyrus's initiative had you flip 2 coins, and if either of them is heads, you would look at your opponent's hand and choose 1 card from it and put it on the bottom of their deck for each heads you flipped. So you could judge your opponent to 4, play Cyrus's initiative. If you flip at least 1 heads, there's a decent chance that you were just totally debilitating your opponent. And if you ever got 2 heads, the game was very likely over. because at worst, even if you judged yourself into a totally abysmal and unplayable hand, you could always go impersonate another supporter on your next turn and continue to set up from there. And for matchups where your opponent was able to kind of set up outside of that, you still had some other long-term game plans to go along with it, including one of the most powerful attackers that ever existed in these SP formats in the form of Garchomp C level X with its Dragon Rush attack for 3 colorless, but there is a tool card called Energy Gain, which is effectively counter gain that is just always turned on for SP Pokemon. So really, Dragon Rush only ever cost 2 colorless, and we also had double colorless in the format. So for Dragon Rush, for 3 quote unquote colorless energy, would have you discard 2 energy from Garchomp C, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and do 80 damage to that Pokemon. But Garchomp could not use Dragon Rush during your next turn. And Healing Breath as a Pokepower existed on Garchomp. You almost never actually utilized it because a lot of times the SP based decks would either one hit KO each other kind of back and forth. Most of the time you just did not have an SP Pokemon that had damage on it that you cared about removing damage from. Garchomp C itself is kind of a serviceable attacker, particularly in SP based mirror matches, because the Garchomp C is weak to itself. So you would a lot of times be able to also donk opposing Garchomp Cs with Claw Swipe. So for a double colorless, you would do 30 or 60 to an opposing Garchomp C, and with 2 Flash Bites from Crobat, take a knockout there. Earthquake was actually also a serviceable way to knock out several things, being able to do 50 damage for a double colorless in conjunction with that energy gain tool. So then some of the other kind of like marquee, just standard setup and included tech cards in the format. We had a 2-1 Uxie level X line with that setup Pokepower to draw till we had 7 cards. And then Uxie has Trade-Off, which is Recon Directive from Dracloak. Except at the time, this ability was considered so powerful, you could only use it once a turn. So I don't know how we got so off the rails from that. But Uxie also had a Zen Blade attack that for double colorless would do 60 damage, and Uxie could not use Zen Blade during your next turn. And so the big thing there is that Uxies are able to knock out other Uxies. You can also notably hit Gallade for 120 damage. Or no, sorry, you would only do 90 because Gallade had a plus 30 weakness. But you would be able to do a serviceable amount of damage to a Gallade and kind of try to set it up for a knockout somewhere down the line. And then one of the big developments that Conlay in particular put into this deck that we had not initially included was the Honchkrow from Supreme Victors. With its Darkness Restore Pokepower, Honchkrow was able to, if it was your active Pokemon and your opponent's bench wasn't full, select a basic from their discard pile and put it onto their bench. And there were a couple of matchups where this was just notably extremely powerful. One of the big ones that comes to mind is the Gyarados matchup, where you could just pull multiple Magikarps out of your opponent's discard pile and plop them onto the bench. And then the follow-up to that is Honchkrow had this attack Riot that did 30 damage, plus 10 more damage for each Pokemon in play that was not an evolved Pokemon, yours and your opponent's. So, you have to remember at the time, HP numbers are notably much lower than they are in the modern game. So reasonably, you could control the fact that even if it was just your side of the board, Riot would do a minimum of 80 damage, which could very likely knock something out. And then your opponent is likely to have at least a couple of basics on their board as well. So being able to reach for knockouts on things like Luxray level X or Garchomp level X in particular made Honchkrow a pretty reasonable thing to swing in with. You had some other tech attackers in the deck. Go ahead.
And just a reminder, the level X's, they're not evolved Pokemon, right? They're
Correct.
Considered leveled up as opposed to,
Correct.
so they're still basics.
Yep.
Is an important thing to keep in mind.
Yes, very true. The other big thing was that Murkrow had an attached tool at the time, the Dusk Stone, that allowed you to evolve Murkrow the same turn that you put it into play. So you could keep your Murkrow safe from something like a Dragon Rush from Garchomp C or from being gusted up with a Bright Look from a Luxray GL level X. Some other options, just because we are still a Dark deck and an SP-based deck, we have Honchkrow G, that for 0 energy could use Honcho's command to search your deck for 2 in any combination of Stadium or Trainer cards that had Team Galactic's Invention in its name. So this could go grab you any of the following. You could get a Power Spray, a Poketurn, an SP Radar, an Energy Gain, and there were a couple of Stadiums that were just never really all that good, but we'll go into a little bit more detail on what these cards do when we get down to them. I just want to finish off the Pokemon here really quick. The last one is Toxicroak G, and this is really just the Luxray killer. This is a card. For a while, Luxray kind of had run free in the format prior to the introduction of this card. because it was a promo card that was released in. It wasn't a blister pack. It came with some sort of booklet, and I can't remember for the life of me what that product was. But
My brother might know.
yeah, it's not super relevant. But Toxicroak G had the ability or Poke Power Leap Away that was once during your turn. If Toxicroak G is your active Pokemon, you may flip a coin. If you get heads, return Toxicroak G and all attached cards to your hand. So this kind of gets around the fact that Toxicroak's actually a pretty poor starter and not necessarily something that you would want to waste one of your Poke turns on picking it up. But the big reason that this was included was for the Poison Revenge attack that for a Psychic and a Colorless, or again, with that energy gain, just a Psychic Energy would do 20 damage, and if any of your Pokemon were knocked up by damage from an opponent's attack during their last turn, the attack does 20 plus 40 more, and they're now poisoned. So notably, you would do 120 damage to something like Luxray GL Level X that was fighting weak, which would one-hit KO that Luxray GL Level X. So really big in that mirror match, not super relevant in a lot of other games. And then getting into the trainers, SP decks always ran 4 copies of Cyrus's Conspiracy. Super powerful supporter card at the time, allowed you to search your deck for another supporter card, a basic energy, and a Team Galactic Invention trainer card. So really just setting up your hand to continue your game plan next turn, as well as advancing what you're currently doing on your board at the time, and just giving you easy access to your energy cards. We already talked about Cyrus's initiative. Pokemon Collector was just search your deck for 3 basics that have 100 HP or less. No, sorry.
No, just
This
three
this
basics.
is just 3 basics. I think the 100 HP or less is what the Professor Elm's training or something like that.
It's a little later.
Gosh, I'm mixing up all my search cards.
It's all good.
Judge literally has the same text as Modern Judge. We've talked about Baby Search before, but it was a supporter card that allowed you to put a card from your hand on top of your deck, then search your deck for a Pokemon. So notably, if you were under an item lock from something,
Like
you would be able to, from Def and from Dialga, you'd be able to still go find some of your Pokemon. Felicity's Drawing really was just in here as a draw card because there were not a lot of solid draw supporters in this format. Most things were drawing cards with either Uxie or Claydol. So instead, we had Felicity's Drawing that was just discard up to 2 cards from your hand. If you discard 1, you draw 3. If you discard 2, you draw 4. So you could filter some kind of dead cards out of your hand if they weren't relevant for a particular matchup, like pieces of this Honchkrow line, or the Toxicroak G, or just excess other cards that are in your hand, excess copies of Sableye as an example, and just being able to filter out cards that way. Another SP-based card in the supporter category would be Aaron's Collection. So you search your discard pile for 2 in any combination of Pokemon SP and basic energy cards, show them to your opponent, put them into your hand. So very similar to something like Clara or Lana's Aid in terms of recovery. And then we get into the Team Galactic's invention. So the first one, and one of the kind of main reasons to play SP Pokemon, was Team Galactic's Power Spray. This is the only card you've ever been able to play from your hand during your opponent's turn. And, effectively was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Trap card, where if your opponent attempted to use a Poke Power, you just get to play this card from your hand and say no. But you could only do it if you had at least 3 Pokemon SP in play, which, again, notably, not super hard to do when you have something like Pokemon Collector available to you to go find those basic Pokemon. Team Galactic's Poke Turn was kind of like Scoop Up Net, where you just selected one of your Pokemon SP and put it and all cards attached to it back into your hand. So you get to recycle your energy gain Pokemon tools. You get to reuse the Flashbite ability. You could get Toxicroak G out of play if you failed on the Leap Away Poke Power. Or you could recycle a Garchomp so that you could utilize that Dragon Rush turn after turn after turn if you're really trying to keep your opponent out of the game. One of the later released SP trainer cards was SP Radar, that was kind of like Bebe Search, but in item form, but only for Pokemon SP. So you would put a card from your hand on top of your deck, find a Pokemon SP from your deck, show it to your opponent, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck afterward. Then we had Premier Ball. That was search your deck or discard pile for a Pokemon level X and put it into your hand. So the nice thing there, you could go find either your Uxie or your Garchomp really easily. Or this would be the reason that sometimes you would see decks that would run a 3-1 Garchomp line, because notably at the time, Pokemon level X are considered to have the same name as the Pokemon that they level up from. So you could only have 4 total between Garchomp C level X and Garchomp C in your deck. So you would have to choose between either running a 2-2 or a 3-1 if you wanted to include 4 copies of that card. Then we had Versus Seeker, which is half of a Miracle headset, but not an A-Spec. Extremely powerful,
Miracle Ace.
extremely powerful card. Powerful enough that they decided to make a slightly better version of it in Ace spec. And at the time we were able to play four, and at certain
That's
formats where
so
this card was
wild.
legal, you could and would want to play four.
Yeah,
Probably wildly underplayed, honestly,
that's what
in
I'm
a
thinking.
lot of older formats. And then I've alluded to it a lot, but we have Energy Gain as the final trainer card, and it's just a tool card specifically for Pokemon SP that you could actually only attach to Pokemon SP. If somehow this card became not attached to a Pokemon SP, you would immediately discard it. But as long as it is attached to a Pokemon, the attack cost of that Pokemon is one colorless less. So again, making your Dragon Rush 2 energy, makes your Claw Swipe 1 energy, makes Earthquake 2 energy, lets your Honchkrow G use its sniping attack for 1 dark, lets Toxicroak attack for 1 psychic, and then we'll just run the energies to complement all of those attacks as necessary. You have 4 basic energy that you can search for with Cyrus's Conspiracy, while also fulfilling your attack costs. 4 special dark to combo with Honchkrow, Honchkrow G, and Sableye, and then 4 double colorless to really kind of round things out and let you attack with things like Uxie or Garchomp C relatively easily. And so this was a pretty powerful deck that early on in its development, we really had the idea of what if I just didn't let my opponent play the game? And that was really like the initial version of this deck played like Super Scoop Up and played the Let Loose Giratina from Platinum because Judge hadn't come out yet. And so you're just looking at, or no, Judge was legal. So it's just, but the whole point was just, what if I just don't let them play the game? And so you would try to let loose potentially multiple times a game and really just try to lock your opponent out of things before you just pick apart their board. And between the combination of lowering and limiting their hand size between Judge and Initiative, and then using Power Spray in conjunction with Dragon Rush to remove things like Claydol from the board, the deck was very much so capable of just locking your opponent out of the game pretty reasonably. And that was how Khan was able to take this deck all the way to first place in Nationals that year.
Yeah, it seems like a menace, dude. Like this seems like it would probably not be that fun to play against.
Yeah, there are some decks that just don't care. Like I think notably Eric Nance's Steelix deck
Steelix, yeah.
probably does not care about this deck in the slightest. And the Gardevoir matchup is also, it's interesting and a little intricate because if you try to go all in on the initiative strategy on turn one, if they're able to candy into a Gardevoir, there's a chance that you just get initiatived every turn and
Ooh,
never
yeah.
get to play the game beyond that.
That's pretty bad.
So there's definitely counterplay to it, but there are definitely also, games that you play with the deck or play against the deck where it just feels like it's going to win no matter what the opponent does.
Yeah, I could see a world where like Gardevoir also just like gets early psychic lock and your deck just doesn't do anything anymore.
For sure.
Or they are able to get their own Sableye in the active and basically still set up, and it doesn't matter. So I played Guardia a lot in this format when I played it. I played in this like another retro event last year for NAIC
Sure.
and played Guardia, and that definitely had a lot of good counterplay against a lot of decks, and then has the Machamp line, which
Yeah.
kind of runs through a lot of SPs.
Yep. Yeah. Notably,
You're
Khan
able to get it
opted
set up.
not to play an Unknown G. I guess that's one of the other reasons to run the Honchkrow is as a Machamp counter, just because it is resistant to fighting and it is an
Nice.
evolved Pokemon.
Yep.
But yeah, everything else in the deck gets taken out, quite literally, with takeout. It just for that one fighting energy. But yeah, so this is going to kick off our 2010 time capsule decks, and we will be back next week with another one. So
Great.
Moving on, we are going to jump immediately into some tournaments here. So the first of 3 that we're going to talk about is the Melbourne Regional Championship that happened over in Australia. And looking at the metagame percentages with our variant grouping turned on here on Limitless Labs, we can see that still Dragapult is the number 1 most played deck, or was the number 1 most played deck overall, with Gardevoir following it up at number 2, which shouldn't be a surprise to us at this point. Raging Bolt coming in at number 3, Joltik Box at 4, Goldengo at 5, and Terra Box rounding out the best of the best at number 6 at 5.7%. So Dragapult and Gardevoir are still sitting at like almost 20% and just over 15% respectively. They've got to just still be considered to kind of be the 2 best decks in the room, and that seemed to be the story as we translate over to the final standings of the event as well. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that because Dragapult was nowhere to be seen in the asymmetrical top cut for this event, right?
Yeah. Let me see. Did you know that Limitless Lab you can group tournaments together and look at
I did
all
not.
three metagames? If you go to metagame at the top, you can just add all three and then go from there, and that'll group them all.
Let me see.
That might be like a good way to talk about it.
Hmm.
If you go to metagame at the top.
Right. No, this is with all. This is all three events.
Okay.
It still just looks very similar.
Well, then there you go. I don't know.
I think that
Because
means
it's
because this is
sorry.
just Melbourne. So if I
Okay,
turn
I
the
wasn't sure if you knew that. Like, if that might help us talk about it.
I mean, it looks very. There's a little bit of like flip flopping here,
Yeah.
but for the
All
most part, it
right.
looks pretty similar. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I just made a bad segue into the standings because I initially thought Dragapult had also made cut for some reason. Um, okay,
Sorry, man.
no, you're good. You're good.
I
You're good.
was like
I'm the one
looking
that
at
screwed
that.
it up.
You're good. You're
Yeah,
good.
I
You
know
want to
that.
start over? Or are you
Sure.
good?
I'll just figure out a way to make it work. So we've got um, and then Terabox rounding up things at number 6 at 5.7%. So we still have Dragapult at roughly 20% at this first event. Gardevoir has risen up to be that 15% meta percentage. And kind of as has become standard in a lot of events so far, the deck that, or actually, what I should say is if we look over here at the top cut standings, this is a very Australia event. And so when you look at the top 8, we did have an asymmetrical cut of top 11, and we'll get through all of those decks momentarily. But if you look at the top 8 in particular, we see a lot of homogeneity in that we have 5 Gardevoirs in the top 8. And of note, the winner of the event is none other than Australia native Brent Tonneson, taking down his second event of the year and second event of this format with Gardevoir with the same exact list that he took down his other event with Jeremy Long in second place, also with Gardevoir, Daichi Shimada coming over from Japan with Terabox, Angus Johnson with Gardevoir, Callum Walker with Gardevoir, Natalie Millar with Gardevoir, and notably the last 3 players that I mentioned are all also playing Brent's same 60. Nigel Tan with Terabox, Soda Kasai with Raging Bolt, Riku Nakajima and Ethan Liu, also with Raging Bolt, and Michael Bio, rounding out our and being the lone American in this asymmetrical cut, but rounding out that asymmetrical with a Flareon box of all things. And so there's not a ton to look at here list wise. A lot of these lists are kind of more of the same from what we've seen, but we did pull out one deck list in particular to look at. So, like I said, 4 of these 5 Gardevoir lists are Brent's 60, but the one list that I wanted to look at in particular was Daichi Shimada's Box list. And yeah. So what stands out to you about this deck, John?
The green guy in the middle with 30 hit points playing Badoo in a terror box. I haven't seen that yet.
Sure.
That's kind of interesting. It buys you a turn sometimes. You run a counter catcher, so you can still do the whole counter catcher up Badoo play, and jamming tower to prevent like the rescue board from being able to be used. I mean, you have your own, but like you can play jamming tower down, mop your own liabilities, which is nice. Like that's a nice thing to have in a terror box deck.
For sure.
Not every terror box plays a jamming tower, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, I think everything else, all the attackers make sense. I don't think I see anything outside of the Badoo that makes me stop what I'm doing and talk about
Right.
it. But those are the 2 big things I think.
Yeah. The one thing we saw a little bit that had popped up in Milwaukee was the inclusion of Volcanion,
Mm-hmm.
and we notably do not see that here. Although now that I think about it, maybe I'm thinking about some Terrapago space decks rather than being full Terra box. But we see the trend again. I know when the format started, people were on 2 Teal Mask Ogre Ponds
Oh,
and
true.
5 Grass Energy. And so we've seen those numbers be continuously slimmed down in favor of adding extra copies of cards like Crispin or adding those extra stadium bumps, like you mentioned. That rescue board is the inclusion that we saw come in following a couple of other early events. The one thing that's missing that had been another pretty consistent inclusion was that Brock Scouting.
Mm-hmm.
to maybe help find a Noctowl or some of your basics in the mid game, or potentially under a Badoo lock. And I guess Daichi just decided that for some, I'm still struggling to figure out which matchup in particular Badoo is super strong against. But I guess he just decided, hey, this card is good. I'm going to put it in
Mm-hmm.
my deck.
Yeah, you definitely catch your opponent off guard if they're not expecting you to have Badoo, and you
Sure.
can just go, okay, turn two, Buddy Poffin for Badoo, and like maybe they had built their hand up on a turn two Candy or something like that with Gardevoir, and now they're forced to just kind of figure it out from there. So it could catch your opponent off guard in a couple different scenarios. But yeah, definitely less traditional in that sense for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but that was really about all we wanted to talk about. The other kind of interesting thing, I'm not going to pull up the whole list here because the list is more or less the same to Ian Rob's EV box list, but Michael did opt to play an Umbreon EX in his deck just to have an option to one hit KO a Gardevoir. I'm still not sold on that being the way to solve that matchup. That matchup feels pretty rough, even though it is winnable in some particular scenarios. But I guess it must have worked out a little bit for him. I think that he did play against a number of Gardevoirs, and we see a tie here and a win here. So,
Against Daichi, yeah.
well, different Daichi.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
Stuff from Japan, but different
Yeah,
Daichi.
fair enough.
Fair enough. So yeah, that's going to close out Australia. Congrats to Brent and Australia continuing to be Australia with their multiple copies of the same deck in top 8 of their event. Next up on the docket is Utrecht, and I know you tuned into a bit more of this than I had time to. Did you want to talk about this one, John?
I just watched a lot of day two coverage. It seems similar. I mean, all the events we're going to talk about, I don't think any of the metagames were super surprising. We've reached the point where it's pretty established at this point, where
Sure.
like the top two decks are, and then I mean, Raging Bolt, I guess, is up pretty high too. But I feel like Raging Bolt and Joltic Box are like the decks of the week for newer players, and they're going to see a lot of play. And Joltic Box in particular gives you like the ability to convert to day two with a minimal amount of testing or in-depth game knowledge and
Yeah.
matchup knowledge. Like you can just route stuff kind of on the fly and go from there. And it's still competitive. And it does well enough to make day two, but then kind of falls off from there, in my opinion.
Sure.
I I just tuned in for the last few rounds of day two, and it was a lot of Dragapult in this one, and some really good Dragapult matches. A lot of interplay between. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to like be super excited about Badoo hitting into Badoo and then Monkey Math and all that kind of stuff. It gets a lot. It gets pretty tiring to be honest to try to really decipher it. But it does encourage high level gameplay and allow like the skill difference to come to the top. And we saw some cool Dragapult lists throughout the day. I don't know if this there was any like surprise decks or anything that really stood out. To be honest, to me, I don't know. Was there anything that you saw that you thought was notable outside of
Um,
just
I
the
know,
metagame percentages?
I know some people were excited about, and I think he made day two. There, and it might be in the other category. Nope. Yeah, there was an Okie Dokie deck that had
Okay,
made its way onto stream on day one. I wasn't initially going to bring this up, but it's just for the sake of it being something different. And
yeah,
actually, I played against this on ladder earlier today.
okay,
Um, it
definitely, yeah. I
it's
saw. It
it
reminds me they had an Okie Dokie deck in Baltimore
it
that
exists. This
yeah.
is what I will say about it. It's I my friend Santiago was very excited about this, particularly just because I think in his mind it was just because it was something different. I
Mm-hmm.
just don't see how this deck wins games. Like your game plan is
Yeah,
hope your opponent can't deal with your onslaught of back to back to back to back 230 HP basics, which admittedly could be pretty difficult to do because they are one prizers, but just consistently finding a luminous to put on it along with a fighting energy and taking multiple turns to power each one up, or hoping that they walk into either the Dunsparce or Scissor and really set you up from there. It's just not something that I really expect, a seasoned player to do at the end of the day.
that's fair. Yeah, it isn't. Is it interesting that he chose not to play EXP share at all? We
Yeah,
saw that in the build in Baltimore. I feel like that'd be a good card in here. Um, but yeah, the Luminous gets a lot of use. I don't know. Okie dokie is pretty fun. It's an inherently really, really strong card. Like in a different metagame, slightly different, like we would see a lot more Okie dokie being played, in my opinion. Like if we had Rainbow Energy, or I mean, even then, I think that would probably be enough. But like Luminous, it's like good, but not the best. I don't know. It's interesting. I think,
I
yeah,
see.
I think it's still
I
pretty good.
feel like the card that Okidogi is looking for is Twin Energy, but
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that would be a healthy interaction.
Like counter energy.
Or sorry, that's what I was thinking of. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because that very much so seems like a card that would work very well with Okidogi.
I'm surprised. I think the one in Baltimore also ran Monkey Dory as well. I don't know
Oh,
if did
that
that
would
list
make
have
sense.
it.
It didn't.
Yeah, so like that seems weird to me because like then you're able to heal your Okidogi a little bit more, so you don't just get sniped by Dragapult.
Oh no, he
Like
did. He did. I'm sorry.
okay,
I
okay,
misspoke.
sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's some counter plays with Monkey play it can get there. Like I feel like the Dragapult matchup's not the worst since
I
they're
mean,
not able to
he
really.
did make top 32, admittedly. Like he
Yeah,
top
that's
32
impressive.
at a 1200 player event, but that was not enough to make asymmetrical top cut or
No.
non-asymmetrical, I should say, because Utrecht did have a clean top 8 cut. And kind of conversely to what we saw in Melbourne, we saw 5 Dragapults show up in the top 8 of this event. So we have Joa, and I'm going to butcher his last name, but Wiegner,
It's
Wiegner.
Wegener. Yeah, it's a
Yeah, there
V
we go.
since it's German.
Yeah, with straight Dragapult, Alberto Conti showing up in another top cut of an event with a finals appearance with straight Dragapult. Uh, Johan uh, Barzazak with Raging Bolt. Noah Sakadejan with Dragapult Dust Noir. Jan Schaefer with Enzorark. Gino Pili with, whoops, with Dragapult Charizard. And Brian Morehouse with Gardevoir and Camille Kolatosti with straight Dragapult. And gosh, I've got to learn how to pronounce these names before we come onto these episodes, man.
Right.
But the couple of decks that we did want to highlight from this tournament in particular were Joa's straight Dragapult deck, and in particular, like the one real standout card from all of the times that Joa was on stream this weekend was Maractus.
For
And
sure.
I know you had a lot of feelings about this card in this deck in particular, John. So why don't
Oh,
you hit me
dude.
with them?
Yeah, Maragdus allowed for so many amazing comebacks throughout this weekend. Watching this event, there were times where the announcers and I watched Azul's restream. So Azul was like, "I don't see how this guy wins." You know, he would have a whole like board get wiped out by Baby Raging Bolt and like not have anything going for him, not have any like and then he would get like a Brock scouting and get a Maractus or something, just like an Arvin and get Maractus out and like counter catcher and then just lock the game down from there. And it allowed for, and with that paired with Genesect, like shutting off a lot of the times Prime Catcher
Sure.
or Unfair Stamp in the mirror match, if you will. It just locked the opponent out of the game entirely. Like we saw it, and I will say this: like Maractus is one of those inclusions that, and like so many other times where we've seen it with Mawile back in the last format before rotation. Um, it's a card that if you're prepared for it, it has no effect. But if you're unprepared for it, it can completely wreck you and just bring up something like a Latios or Pheasantipity that can just, it can't do anything. It's just stuck in the active. And 20 damage might not seem a lot, and it's not, granted, but like if you can get the time to just dig through your deck with Recon Directive and set up more Dragapults and just soften stuff up, and it gets to the point where you just go, okay, Monkey, put that down to like the last 60 remaining on it, bring something else up, and then take 6 prizes. It's not on hard. It's not that hard to do.
No,
Um,
no.
and so go for it.
It's just honestly, like you said, 20 damage is not a lot, and in a lot of ways, I think that is kind of to the benefit of
Mm-hmm.
the Dragapult deck. Like you said, it does give you that time factor. where you get, an additional, like, if you the ideal scenario against Raging Bolt, you lock down their Latias and you suddenly have 10 turns to set up Dragapults, attach energy cards, get your hand set up to the point that you can kind of Iona be able to do some sort of counter catcher plus Iono or counter catcher to take 5 or 6 prizes with a phantom dive at the end of the game and just like shut the door on your opponent being able to do anything to come back. Because if they, if the even if you have a board like you said, I think it was top 4 in particular where Joa played against Raging Bolt and had a board with 0 Dreepies on it and still managed to come back and win the game.
Yeah,
And
it was a crazy. I'd definitely recommend going back and watching that again. He won 2-0. Not to spoil it, I guess, but it's still just like an amazing. Like both of those games, it felt like he had no right winning. But Maractus just did Maractus things and prevented his opponent from having enough energy and having enough. Like his opponent did do some things that probably weren't to his benefit, but it's still just like after like I think once Joa realized this is like the Brent 60 or not the Brent 60, sorry, the
Labella,
Labella 60, correct? Yeah. And his only out was Prime Catcher. Like
sure,
the game was basically over.
yeah,
Like once that was sussed out, there wasn't a whole like once he realized that, he's just like, okay, cool, now I win. I just get Genesect up, just start cornering. And there's some other cool inclusions in this list. I like the Latias. We've seen it a couple times in the straight, like the quote unquote straight Bolt. But just having played Blood Moon, it feels really bad when you start them.
oh yeah,
So like having an out to as a Pokemon that you can search out, and not as a switch card because like item lock stinks. So you can go Brock Scout and get Latios and
mm-hmm.
get the Blood Moon out there and get your own Badoo up there or whatever. It's just really nice.
Well,
And
and
then
it
also
makes
for like Maractus
Maractus,
too.
yeah,
Yeah,
Maractus is pretty thick for as
basic.
useful as it can be.
Yeah.
And then so even though we don't, it's not featured in this list, and we don't have another Dragon Bolt list pulled up that does feature it. But the other kind of inclusion that we saw as a response to the Raging Bolt decks is just a more standard inclusion of Luxurious Cape as a means of. So the line with that is you attach it to a Dracloak because then you become immune essentially to being one hit KO'd on the bench by a baby Raging Bolt, and you force a different play from your opponent if they're trying to keep you on the back foot or keep a
Mm-hmm.
Dragapult out of your deck or off of your field rather. I think the Maractus in particular is going to force some deck building changes from people, and we'll have to start seeing some respect in the form of either increased copies of Turo or Kirin or even just Switch in general in decks like Raging Bolt. I think that they'll almost be forced to have at least one additional switch out on top of Prime Catcher.
Yeah, agreed. And that's just the kind of cycle we go through. Like
Yeah, exactly.
literally at the cup I judged on Sunday, I had a player after watching Utrecht put in a switch in his Raging Bolt, and it won him like a different matchup. It wasn't Maractus; it was something else. It was a Tapu Koko EX. So
Oh,
paralysis from that. Yeah, kind of a random ride on build, but I ran that. But yeah, just he ran that switch for Maractus, but it paid off because similar strategy. Um, and I think we'll just see that kind of pivot happen again.
for sure.
It's just it's like this the song is old as time basically. Just kind of whenever a new tech comes out, people tech for it, and then they tech for it, so it falls out of favor, and then people stop teching for it, and then people re-include the tech card, and then yeah, you guys get
Yeah,
the point.
yeah.
So
Well, and it's similar to the relationship that we've seen decks have with Badoo in this format, where
mm-hmm.
coming into the format, a lot of decks were way more so item based, and you would see Dragapult decks that played like 4 Poffin, 4 Ultra Ball, 2 Nest Ball, and now we've come to lists that play 5 search supporters to go find your basics and evolutions, as opposed to some of those item based search cards. And that's just kind of the respect on the card. And Dragapult in particular is kind of a weird example because it's a little bit more able to handle doing that than a lot of other decks because you have such a powerful ability like Recon Directive to compensate for the fact that you're not playing a draw supporter for turn. but it
Yeah.
still is just kind of demonstrative of the fact that Badu has had an impact on the format, and I expect that Maractus will as well.
Yep. I mean, you can make the same argument like this doesn't run a counter stadium, so you could run neutralization zone,
Yeah.
and this would have no answer for that. So it's just the kind of whole trying to outsmart your opponent game. And we
Yep.
love to see it. Like that's what makes Pokemon is that you have to run the same 60. You can't sideboard. You can't switch stuff out between games or anything like that. You have to play the same list throughout the whole tournament. So you're
Mm-hmm.
really stuck kind of with what you brought, and you live and die by that. And so that's
Exactly.
exciting.
Other deck list that we wanted to talk about here was the kind of this is more or less the Europe special at this point because
Mm-hmm.
I know that it was first popularized in Europe by Oscar Madsen, and I think Jesper Eriksson was also a big proponent of this deck because I think the two of them test together quite frequently. But Dragapult Charizard hitting the scene again, and um, even though Oscar was not the one who played this deck to this sixth place finish, that was Gino. I do believe that this is Oscar's exact 60. So we have a 4-4-2 Dragapult line, a 2-0-2 Charizard, 2 Badu, a 1-1 Rabska, Munkidori, Chiyu, and Pheasantipity. And the Rabska in particular is really interesting to me, and I guess it's kind of going down the path of everyone has always said Charizard based decks have bad Dragapult matchups. And the answer to that, I suppose, would be if I'm going to lose to Straight Pult, well, if I can TM Evo into Rapska, suddenly I at least have a shot in that matchup. And I'm taking advantage of the fact that Straight Pult tends to do better at events than Dusknoir based Dragapult decks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And 70 is a nice number because it prevents them from doing two monkeys and knocking it out. You're
Yep.
able to just run your own monkey here and kind of counter any little damage placement that they can place. So it gets to the point where you're able to, yeah, basically make your bench immune to Dragapult. And that nerfs Dragapult a lot. If you're doing like a straight fight, Charizard really will win that if it's a straight fight. But yeah, it's cool to see kind of evolution of this list account for the rise in Dragapult, or I guess the continued dominance of Dragapult. Chi Yu's an interesting inclusion. I guess it's just a non EX attacker here, and has a nice charging up like ability or attack first attack for one fire, attach two basic fire from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. So that's a nice thing to have to like if you have to retreat and you can attack with it, and then if your opponent can't do anything, you can power up a Charizard again.
Yep.
So that's nice.
That's really the big
It
thing
is
because.
interesting.
Sorry,
I
go
said
ahead.
it is really interesting that there's no psychic energy in this deck. It's completely dependent upon luminous energy.
Yeah.
So that shows the meta where we're at, where there's not a lot of threatening going on. To even though we have enhanced hammer, no one's played enhanced hammer at all in this format. There's not a lot of special energy hate right now. So that might be something we see. I don't know, going into NAIC or Portland, maybe somebody starts checking for all the luminous energy at some point. But interesting to see like meta trends and developments for deck lists as it's gone on.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if this deck picks up moving forward. I think that
Fair.
there are a lot of cool combos. Like we saw the Chi-Yu win John Roberts' Charizard deck in Milwaukee, and then we see it again here. And that's kind of like Charizard kind of shores up the Gardevoir matchup theoretically for Dragapult a bit more than other cards that you include in the deck. And then the Chi-Yu is like the natural answer to when your Charizard gets mind bended by your opponent's Munkidori. Like you mentioned, you just retreat the Charizard to the Chi-Yu, get the 2 fire back on the Charizard, and suddenly you have a threat sitting on your bench, and your Chi-Yu is ready to kind of do some damage as well in the meantime. But yeah, interesting deck. Not one that I'm personally a huge fan of, but admittedly also haven't played a ton with it. But it has always seemed to be more popular in Europe, so I'm not sure if we'll see a ton of it this coming weekend in Portland.
Yeah, we might see a few Brave Souls venture play it, but yeah, I would expect that it doesn't really ever get more popular than our regular Dragapult or even the Dragapult Dusknoir.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah.
And then final event we're going to talk about. And before we talk about Masters here in Santiago, it's worth mentioning that the seniors division was taken down by none other than Gabriel Fernandez. So
Undefeated at
undefeated and
703. Yep.
has won every single Latin American regional possible, I believe.
Yeah. Yep, every single one, and both ICs he's played at this year. So he's. We were talking about it before the podcast. This will, if he wins NAIC, it will be statistically a perfect season where he's capped out every single regionals with a first, every possible IC with a first. He has played, I think, in 6 or 7 regionals at this point,
Wild.
and got first at all but one. And in that one, he was at San Antonio. He got 6th or 7th. So definitely otherworldly behavior. Like we've seen dominant seniors in the past, but this is a new era. This is a new like force that he ages up next year. It'll be like we were talking. It would be really interesting to see how he does next year. I don't imagine he slows down.
No,
Um,
no. Especially, so it's one of the things you notice, like the kids that are in this younger age group, especially the recently aged up seniors, seem to have the free time necessary to really put the time and effort into testing and learning these matchups and talking about the game with other people and getting their head wrapped around understanding everything they need to take an event down. Before we move back to Masters, I think it's really interesting to see an asymmetrical cut with 7 people in it. So it looked like
oh,
it was a what should have been a top 4, but it's weird because there's 41 people. I don't understand why this was the case,
huh.
unless maybe there was a top 8 and somebody got DQ'd after cut got
Yeah,
posted.
that might be the case. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate too much, but
Sure, sure.
that would
It
make
just
the most sense logically. Yeah, somebody got disqualified after Top Cut started.
it just looks really interesting on a standing sheet.
Yeah, yeah, I haven't seen that before for sure.
But to go back to the Masters division, and we'll look at just the metagame as a whole. Interestingly, Raging Bolt pops up as the number 1 deck as opposed to Dragapult and Gardevoir. And notably, Dragapult is half of the meta percentage of what it was at the other 2 events.
Interesting.
So we have those. Joltik Box got a little bit of a bump. Oh, sorry, this is
You
variant
have
grouping
variant
off.
grouping off.
I
Yeah,
messed up. Dragapult is
that's
still the
fine.
most popular. Everyone hold your horses. But yeah, so Dragapult, Raging Bolt, Gardevoir still the top 3. I honestly, I think the top 6 are still identical to what they've been at
Yeah.
all of these events, and with no real surprise. I guess the one surprise is somehow Archaludon is more popular than EVs. But yeah, that's not within the top 6 in any case. So if we come over here and look at the standings, we get to see that William Azevedo took the event down with Gardevoir, and we're going to look at William's list in a little bit because it is notably different from Brent Tonnison's 60. Then we have Julian Gortberry with Raging Bolt, uh, Chen Chi Jin, and I believe that this is a Chinese player that actually lives in Brazil, but still
Okay.
is considered a Chinese representative with Joltik Box. Marco Garcia with Joltik Box, Vitor with Straight Dragapult, Matthias with Dragapult Charizard. Owen Dalgard made the trip down from Washington to play Flareon Box. Daniel Ramirez with Terrapicus Noctowl. Carlos Sepulveda with Goldengo Dragapult. Victor Dragapult Dusknoir. Miguel with Straight Pult. And Felipe with Gardevoir. But the real notable thing here, I guess, is we had 2 Joltik boxes make it into cut. Both of them managed to make it to top 4 before being taken down by 2 of the titans of the format. And the thing that I wanted to pull up here is Williams' list in particular. Like I mentioned, it is different from Brent's deck and is more reminiscent of what we've been seeing from Japan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a little bit slower than Brent's with the one candy and a TM Evo strategy. It's just a different approach. Maybe not slower,
Sure.
but using TM Evo instead of candy to get the Gardevoir out. And it makes sense in a format where you can't find your evolutions as easily to get TM Evo involved. That was, I think, my biggest problem with Guardy. I played a little bit with it on Monday. Was just trying to find the candy Guardy combo or like get all the pieces in play. It can be really tough. And you run the secret box, that helps a lot for sure. But the Evo at least allows you to make sure that you can get that going turn 1, turn 2.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, pretty standard list. We've seen only running the 2 Bravery Charm instead of 3, so maybe more of an emphasis on attacking with Gardevoir EX. And then 3 Monkeys, I think, is pretty standard at this point. I think that's the correct line.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I played a list with 2, and it just felt miserable. getting monkeys down early, and it can be a challenge because your main search is artisan to get those out.
Hmm.
Um, and getting those out early is such a key important piece in Gardevoir now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So notably, like lacking the Cleffa from Brent's deck, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess that you have some credence to that with the inclusion of TM Evo and knowing that that's something that you're going to lean on early game in most games, including the Mew, where Brent has continuously chosen to exclude it. We know Henry's winning list also featured Mew all the way back in Atlanta, and it's a card that I feel it feels really strong, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in Brent's logic as to why he's continued to exclude it from the deck. I guess maybe the reasoning I could get behind is just the lack of bench space for it.
Yeah, that maybe he feels like it's a liability in some matchups.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, just having the extra draw power so much in this format, especially where you don't have. I mean, the Gardevoir has pivoted away from solely an Arvin build to beefing up with a lot more draw supporters and recovery. Like especially more research. We've seen that come back a lot in the last few weeks. But yeah, this I don't know. It's yeah, you don't run as many Poffins, so you're just more focused on getting that like one or two routes out, turn one or two. You have more time to get set up with this build than I think some of the other builds. Um, or that's probably the same amount of time, but it just you have with Gardevoir in general, you have a long time to make your comeback,
Yeah,
and it does feel nice when you can like trap something active, Scream Tail around it, and then just load up a bunch of Monkey Dory damage, and come back. I think this and that's what makes Dragapult and Guardy so good is that they're unrivaled in the ability to come back.
sure.
Um, from
Currently, I think
currently,
that there are some cards from Destined Rivals that I think can also fit into that
ah,
category. Something like
yeah,
Grimmsnarl in particular, which also
mm,
serves as a candidate of something that's likely to knock this deck down a peg. I think
yeah,
before we move off of this list in particular, I think that the Night Stretcher count is something that's really interesting to me. I know we've seen most successful Gardevoir list. Henry's, I think, only ran two, but also ran a Super Rod,
mm-hmm,
which kind of is like more than one Night Stretcher in a way. Um, and then Brent has notably been running four since Atlanta. So only seeing three here is really interesting. And I guess instead, William and some of the other folks that he playtests with decided that some things like the third raw copy of Curlia were a little bit more important to include to maybe make sure that your TM Evo found two Curlias more often than not. But I know I played a few games with this list earlier today, and I've got to say I'm definitely a fan of this more so than the straight kind of what I would consider to be kind of a gambling Guardy, where like
mm,
you're just praying to draw into Curlia and or Rare Candy Gardevoir. But and that's something that I just haven't been a fan of, despite the massive success that Brent's list has had, and admittedly being one of the most successful deck lists ever. It's like if you go pull up the Limitless page for that 60 cards, it's got dozens of names going down across multiple age divisions, multiple events. Just playing it on TCG Live, at least, it feels like okay. Well, I hope my research hits Candy Guardy this turn.
yeah. It does feel very more variance based than this one, where you're like able to guarantee that setup. I mean, you run Cleffa, but it definitely feels like a liability in a lot of matchups with just 30 hit points.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I like this a little better too, I think. But that's the cool thing about Guardy. It's really flexible. You can kind of
for sure.
make a build that suits how you want to play it. And I don't think there's like one, I don't know, somebody might argue this otherwise, but I don't think there's like one best answer right now. I think it's more just like best for meta, best for your specific, where you want to go with it, kind of ability to operate the deck.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, that's any final thoughts before we close out on this past weekend's tournaments?
I think it's more of the same. More Guardy, more Dragapult. But I still think there's a lot of like people might have checked out on the format. If I've seen pretty low attendance numbers at the League Cups I've been to and judged. So I think a lot of players are hopefully getting ready for destined rivals, or for a lot of local players, the competitive season's winding down.
Right.
We're getting into the summer months, so Pokemon's about to take a break for a while. Other than NAIC, we don't have anything but Worlds after Portland. So it'll be those two big things, and then a bunch of figuring out stuff. But I still think all that to say, this format still has a lot of depth to it. Still a lot of thought and skill expression that it's really fun to see, and really fun to play. I think people might complain about Badoo mirrors and all that stuff, and I'm guilty of that too. When I was judging, and I had like players just hitting into each other with Badoo for like 5 or 6 turns, it definitely wears on you a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, but there's a lot of thought that goes into it, right? Like
Right.
you're just jockeying for position. You're trying to get that one turn where you're able to pop off and really dominate your opponent, but not allow them to counter all that with their own play. Like the moment you break trainer lock is a huge part of the game.
Yeah.
You're able to take multiple knockouts a lot of times, take 3 prizes, but we saw a lot on stream at Gdansk.
You mean
Just a lot
Utrecht?
of sorry, get all my European cities mixed up. Utrecht. This is Santiago, but yeah, Utrecht. We saw a lot of times that the player that took the first 3 prizes wasn't always the one that won the game.
Sure.
That it's not that hard to just play unfair stamp, counter catcher, and then just monkey a bunch of damage on the other side of the field and take over the game. So it's cool. It's cool to see that we have comeback potential. This was kind of the end goal for Pokemon at the start of the Scarlet and Violet era, to have that comeback potential, and we're seeing that, and that's really cool, and that's really exciting for me as a player and as a fan of Pokemon in general.
Yep, definitely. So the next thing on the docket would be a tier list of what we expect things to be like going into Portland. But before we do that, we're going to take a little break and head over into Blaine's quiz show for the week. So John, why don't you walk us through Blaine's quiz show, how it works, and what we're playing for?
Okay, so this week, similar to what we've done in the past, I'll just to go over the show for first-time listeners. I'm going to give Aaron 3 questions. There will be multiple choice questions, and Aaron implemented a new thing last week, and I think I didn't put the rule up on my side, but I'll add it in here. So you're going to be able to get 1 hint to help with some of the questions, and you can use it at any time for any question. But if you complete all 3 questions perfect, you'll get 4 points. So you'll get 3 points for or 1 point for each correct answer, and then an extra point if you don't use the hint. This week's category is Pokemart. So similar to how I quizzed Hunter and Aaron on card values, I'm bringing that back, baby.
Okay.
So I'm going to show you the value of 3 different cards I pulled out of bulk this week, or this week and last week, and you're going to tell me the value. All right,
boy.
Starting with a Roserade from Dragons Exalted. This is the reverse hollow version of it. So I don't have a good picture of it, but just imagine this is reverse hollow. And all the prices will be for near mint copies of this card. Is this card worth $8, $18, $24, or $1? This was a non-hollow rare from Dragons Exalted.
Right, but the fact that it's reverse hollow in particular, like how crazy is that? I think this card sees play in GLC sometimes, so maybe that influences the value. I figure it's either got to be 1 or 8. There's no way it's $24. That's absurd. And if anyone's paying $24 for this, I think I might have multiple copies of this in a box somewhere, and I need to go make some money. So I'm gonna go with. This feels so wrong, dude. I'm gonna go with 8. I don't like this category
Aaron,
already.
You're gonna. I know you don't. That's why I picked it. Aaron, you got to go find that shoebox because they are worth $24 each.
This is miserable.
So this card, if you're a visual listener at home, so you are 0 for 1, so no perfect score this week, but there's plenty of time for you to get a couple points to salvage your your point total. All right, next question. I have a Raikou Amazing Rare from Vivid Voltage. This is a newer card. Is this card worth $3, $6, $12, or $18?
See, I have no idea how much this card was worth when it was played in
Sure.
either Lugia or when it was still legal for GLC. I know it's banned in GLC now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There's
gosh, I
also Lost Box too, I believe.
sure, sure. Um, I don't know. We're gonna go. This feels terrible. I have nowhere to go with this. I'm gonna go with. Actually, so this would probably be in hint territory. So I didn't open
Mm.
any cards or any packs from sets that had amazing rares in them. So I don't know how rare they actually are. But I don't want to ask you. Well, fine. That's fine. So when opening packs of sets that had amazing rares in them, were they what rarity category is an amazing rare? Like how rare are they?
Is this a hint?
Sure, I will accept that as my hint for the week.
Okay. I believe they were hollow rare, like maybe the V level. I don't think they were beyond that. Like they weren't secret rares.
Okay.
This is 50 out of 185.
Sure. Right. That didn't help. And the fact that you're not certain about it makes me a little shaky on whether or not that hint counts. But I'm gonna go.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Fine.
go with. Gosh, I'll go with $6. I guess.
Ooh, so close. It was $3.
Son
It's
of a
tanked
gun.
quite a bit. It was up pretty high. I think it was at $12 at one point. But yeah, since it has been banned from GLC, it's come down quite a bit. Yeah, let's see. The price of it has at one point. Let's go look at the last 6 months. Well, I guess it wasn't all that much more. But yeah, it was like up to $4 at one point. So
Jeez.
never super crazy. All right.
To save face, before we get into
go
question
for
3,
it.
to save face, I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to cut this from the show,
No, you're not.
just to preserve my dignity.
Oh my goodness.
No, that's fine. Let's head into question 3.
All right. Question 3. This might be one you're more
Oh,
familiar with.
okay.
Meganium Prime, HGSS 15. So this is the beginning of the Heart Gold Soul Silver era, the beginning of Primes. A really nice card. Is it worth $9, $16, $23, or $40?
So I know a lot of these prime cards have gone pretty far up in value in fairly recent history, probably within the last 3 or so years. I don't know if Meganium is one of them, but just for the sake of it, I'm just going to quick lock in 40 because no amount of thinking is going to help me here.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, you are right to think it is worth a good bit, but it's not quite 40. It is $23. So most of the primes are around the 20 something dollar range, other than I think Magnazones might be a little bit more expensive because it was the most playable out of them.
I was just say I feel like Magnazone, Gengar, Yanmega, Mew.
Gengar
Mew is up there for
way up there.
Mew is up there for sure too.
Mew is way up there as well. Yeah. Yeah, I have a Mew that I have signed by Jason Glazinski.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice, but it's also like, I probably shouldn't I should have had him sign something other than a Mew Prime. So
I wonder if you could get that graded though, like with authenticated
possibly,
with the signature.
Yeah, I could send it off. I could try that. I don't know if they have a signature of his to compare it with. I mean, I'm sure they do. We'll have to see. I think my card shop I sort of bulk at sent something off that was signed by him. So it might be possible. It'd be kind of a cool thing.
Worst case, they could compare it to the signature on one of his World Championship deck cards.
That's true. He does have a couple of those. All right. Well, this helped my spirits out quite a bit, but I'm sorry to you can't all be perfect score weeks, Aaron. But thanks for playing Blaine's quiz show. If I ever need a moral victory or like a clean sweep, I'll just quiz you on card prices once again. So I'll have to keep this in my back pocket for whenever like I'm falling behind on the leaderboard. And you'll just pull out, Ruby Sapphire flavor text or something like that, and I'll just crumble. So
I'm just gonna pull up a card. I'm gonna obscure the bottom and ask you what number card it is next week.
Is that
tell me what set it's from. Like I'm gonna pull up Spoink from Dragon. I'm not gonna tell you it's from Dragon, and you're gonna have to tell me what set it's from and what card number it is.
Yeah, right. All right, maybe
Oh
I
man,
made it a little too hard for this
no,
one.
no,
I
no,
think
you're fine. I think
next
that
time I
there's a,
might do
I
like
think
a
that there's a
higher or lower.
balance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if I
like
could
there's a
go like
balance to card
50-50 as
value.
opposed to yeah, it's tough. Like, and that's kind of it shows you where the market's at, where we don't really have an idea of where anything is valuable anymore. Like I mean, collecting has always been like that. I feel like
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you
yeah.
just it's nebulous, like what actually holds a value and what doesn't. You know, there's some of the cards that I think are the coolest, like I mean, the primes are they're worth a good bit, but like some of the full arts from the EX era, which is a while ago, right? Almost 10 years ago. Like I got a Volcanion EX the other day, and I'm like, oh, this must be like a $20 card, and I look it up, and it's like $3, and it's so wild to see like just what is considered valuable. But
Yeah.
you know, I think that's the cool thing, and that's what makes it a lot of fun to collect is um, value is subjective at the end of the day. Like if it makes you happy to hold it, if when you put it in your collection, is it like that kind of stuff? That's what we play Pokemon for. Like, or that's why we collect a lot of the times. It's not because we want to see the little number get bigger. We want to see like stuff that we care about and have an emotional attachment to,
For sure.
and on display and in our lives. And that's we all love Pokemon. So even if we don't know the prices on stuff, we can still appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, if it makes you feel better too, I think that Heatran and not Heatran, Volcanion and other like XY era cards are going to have their time sometime soon
Oh yeah,
ish.
I definitely
They
stocked up a lot on stuff like that.
they just likely
Um,
haven't aged enough yet.
I
You know, it's like a fine wine. So
I
you
made a
instead of a wine cellar,
investment purchase over
you've got
here
your binder for
where I
things to sit in.
bought a lot of these Guardies from the Radiant collection, and then this is
Okay.
the Volcanians I'm talking about, the dual type ones. So
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely something that I could see being pretty cool, and they are cool right now too. So anyway, not to show and tell too much.
So yeah, last thing here, we opened this format with a tier list and figured, why not do another one heading into the last event of the year. And so the decks that we're gonna rate here are Straight Bolt, Gardevoir, Raging Bolt, Joltik Box, Dragapult Dusknoir, Terra Box, Goldengo Dragapult, Straight Goldengo. If I can drag that over. Oh no, it's down here. I can drag it over. Straight Goldengo. Where'd you go? Flareon Box, Frostlass Monkey Dory, Enzorark, Dragapult Charizard, Poison Archaludon, Blissey, and Roaring Moon to Dunsparce. And so notably, this is the neutralization zone special. And why don't we start off? So what we did last time? How did we categorize these things last time? Actually,
So I think S was clear best I could format. Trying to remember, we did like A was like Broken Lugia esque kind of era. A was like a very dominant deck, but not necessarily on a league of its own. Not the only deck that you could like. S would be considered like you couldn't play anything else reasonably
sure, sure, sure,
in
sure.
my mind.
Okay, so like S is
But
this deck will win the event no matter who plays it, basically.
I think so. I think
A would be
S is like a step above because like A in my mind is like the top, and then S is like you can't reasonably be expected to play anything else.
okay. So
So I think S gets overused a lot, but that's my
yeah,
kind of
that's fair.
philosophy.
So we'll say A would be likely to make um well no, not necessarily likely to make asymmetrical. Maybe trying to rank them in terms of like how they would
A
perform in a
A
tournament
would
isn't
be
the best
like
way to do it, but
most likely to win. B would be like can make cut. C would be make day two, and D is we wouldn't play it. Is that makes sense?
yeah, that'll work. That'll work. So that being said, like so with that in mind, the one of the decks on this list that I think firmly falls into D tier in particular is Poison Archaludon.
Sure.
And it's a deck we've seen continue to fall off in terms of both success and play rate as this format has gone on. And this kind of encompasses all archetypes of Archaludon. Begrudgingly, I was a huge fan of Archaludon Zoroark going into the format, and I think that it just kind of missed its time to shine, particularly with the introduction of Joltik Box to the format and the rise of Raging Bolt and Gardevoir as dominant archetypes. Just made it so Archaludon does not really have a chance to really get out of the gate, despite the fact that it is relatively strong into Dragapult in particular.
Yeah, just too many things that can one shot it, and then Poison has a nice early tempo early game, but then kind of falls off pretty hard after
Yeah.
the first few turns.
Yeah.
I guess we'll go from the bottom to the top. Is that the way you want to go?
I just pick a deck, put it where you think it goes. We don't have to do these in any particular order.
Okay, I'll bounce around. I think Blissey is C tier. It might be higher in a different meta game. Like I think it could make top cut pretty easily if there wasn't Gardevoir as a number 2 deck right now. But because Gardevoir is so popular and because Raging Bolt's done really well, I don't see a world where Blissey, although it has a phenomenal Dragapult matchup,
Mm-hmm.
really stands a chance at taking a tournament down in this current meta game. So I'll put it in C tier.
I can get behind that. I mean, I could almost actually say in the current landscape of the game, I could almost see Blissey going into D as well.
Sure.
There was a list that popped up this past weekend that utilized Scorch from Surging. I think it's Surging Sparks. For one fire, it does 130 and then does 30 to all of your own bench Pokemon. And so the whole thing, you have a one-hit KO on Teal Mask Ogerpon and Goldengo in particular, while also simultaneously fueling your bench with Monkey Dory damage to throw into your opponent's face. I don't know how successful that would end up being at the end of the day, but it's cute. It's an option.
Definitely a new way to play for sure.
Yeah. Next deck up on the list would be something that I feel pretty strongly about. I'm going to talk about Eevee Box here, and I this one is it's a weird one, I think, because it largely depends. It is super metagame dependent, and I say that meaning that I feel like it's really good against 2 of the top 3 decks and is pretty bad into the third one. So Eevee Box has continued to be really strong into both Raging Bolt and Dragapult, with nice one-hit KO options into both of those things and nice prize maps into both of those things, or ways to control the board via Sylveon's Angelite. However, you struggle pretty heavily into Gardevoir.
Okay.
When the Gardevoir player gets a triple Ralts board down and is able to set up something like Curlia Gardevoir, or even just Ralts Curlia Gardevoir oftentimes, and then being able to do like a mind bend onto whichever Eevee evolution you have active, you've only got so many switch outs in the deck to really reasonably play around that before you end up having to retreat and losing some of your really precious and limited energy resources because you don't have a ton of recursion in the deck. Unfortunately, it's weird. I'm going to put Flareon in B, I think, because my assumption going into Portland is that Gardevoir is actually going to be number 2, but it's also going to be a very high number 2. I do still think Dragapult is going to be the overall number 1 because it's Dragapult, but I do think Gardevoir is going to hit that 15 to 17% mark more than likely.
Okay. Interesting. I could see a world where that happens, but I would almost lead towards Raging Bolt still being number 2, just because for whatever reason we've seen players that I guess they're like, oh, I can't play Guardy, which to me it's interesting because I feel like Guardy is easier to play than Raging Bolt at the moment. Like sequencing wise, I don't know, maybe I'm coping, but I think they're pretty comparable on level of difficulty. And I could see, I could see where, Gardevoir, like if people actually start picking it up and playing it and realize, oh, I can play this and start taking that on a little bit more, it does get up to that higher percentage. I guess we'll get it out of the way. Gardevoir has been really, really popular, really, really powerful this time. I almost want to put it in S tier, but I think I'm going to keep it in A tier for now.
Okay.
I think you could almost put it in S tier, but I don't think I think there's enough parity to where we don't quite have a true S tier deck right now between those 3 decks. So I'm going to keep it in A tier, but it's at the very top of A.
Sure,
fighting
I
it
can
out
agree.
with a
I can
couple
agree with
others.
that. And realistically, I think that those top three most played decks, just we can discuss them individually, but I would say that we can
Yeah,
both probably agree that these three are the three A tier decks, and it's not really an argument as to why they are or are like why they would be. I think the interesting thing is that I would call out that straight Dragapult in particular is, in my opinion, the A tier variant of Dragapult. And honestly, I feel like if everyone exclusively, well, maybe that's not the correct thing to say, because Dragapult Dust Noir specifically is better into Gardevoir, even though Straight Pult can win that matchup, and we have seen it win that matchup. The Dust Noir variant is better into Gardevoir in particular. But Straight Pult, you get the extra deck space, you get the flexibility to play things like Genesect and Monkey Dory and um, Maractus potentially, like we've seen, or just extra supporters to make yourself more consistent. I don't know, but
yeah.
that's why I'm a fan of that variant of the deck.
I I think I'm a fan of Dragon Ball Dust Snore more than Straight Bolt, and I can see all the logic you've described, and I agree with all of that. But I think Dragon like Dust Snore allows it just to have an extra dimension in the sense. It allows it to match up into things like have that trick in the back pocket, and you can run but you run Badu, and you can get the if you get the setup turn, we get one turn where you have a Dust Skull down, the whole game can just flip on its head the same way. If you get that one turn with corner, um, and I'm not saying I almost want to keep it in A tier, and I could see a world where it slides down to B. Um, I think I keep it in A for now. I don't think it's fallen off enough. I think we've seen it still make cut at every single one of these past regionals we talked about. Um, it might be losing a little edge, like meta percentage wise. If you break it down between, uh, let's see, if we go back to like the aggregate, um, yeah, it slid down for so Dragapult was 9.7 between those three tournaments, and then now Dragapult Dustnor is 6.7. But the win rate percentage, it's significant enough. It's like 6 or 7 points different. So I guess you could make the argument that like it'll make top eight, but it won't win. So I can side with that. I want to put it at the top of A tier or B tier, right next to like on top of that. I think that's a fair place to put it. But
Okay.
it's a lot closer than I think people want to believe it is. Like everybody might be saying Dragon Ball Dusknoir is over, and that straight Dragon Ball is the only real way to play it. I don't know if I agree with that, but I can see, yeah, it does. There's advantages to Dragapult, the straight Dragapult. You definitely like brought up a lot of good points.
Yeah, well, we can continue talking about Dragapult decks. This Dragapult Charizard, do you have any strong opinions about this one?
I honestly don't. I've kind of written it off. I think it's C tier in my opinion. Like it still does well. Like we saw it get a top eight, but I think more often than not, I mean, I guess it helps in your Gardevoir matchup, and that's like the best selling point of it
Sure.
for sure. You could do C tier or low B tier.
No, I think I agree with this because in my mind, the power plays that Charizard opens up for you are different from the power plays that Dusknoir opens up.
Okay.
And I feel like the matchups where Charizard is good, I just don't see how. Like Dusknoir seems like it should theoretically be better. I don't know. Maybe again, I have not played much with this deck, but I just don't see what Charizard in particular is bringing to the table that you can't handle with the other two what I would consider to be better variants of the deck to begin with.
Sure. All
And
right,
then
going down. Up, go ahead.
yeah, rounding that out, the last Dragapult deck, even though it's not really a Dragapult deck,
Yeah,
would
Golden
be
Gold Dragapult.
Goldengo Dragapult. This is something I feel like Goldengo's kind of fallen off, you know? Like
Yeah,
it started
I'd
off,
agree.
it was the number two deck going into Atlanta, or in terms of popularity, but it's just steadily kind of declined, even though it still remains in that top six, and it's normally, I think, number five after Joltik Box. And
Yeah,
with Goldengo Dragapult being the most popular and most successful variant of the deck, but I still feel like currently, as far as positioning goes,
I
I
think
almost
a
feel like
C
Goldengo
tier.
C. Yeah.
Yeah, I I think it goes there. I think it's a better, partner for Dragapult or than Charizard, but I don't think that I don't know. It doesn't really feel like it has anything special that maybe I just haven't. I'm not really too familiar with the deck, just to be clear, but I don't feel like it's done enough to really make me believe in it quite yet.
Sure.
Um, I
Well,
I've seen good players play it, so that gives me like a lot of reassurance that it is good.
yeah.
But I haven't seen them do well with it, so that's been part of it. At least like not lately. So that's I think kind of just keeping it from B and A tier
Well,
right
if we
now.
set the Dragapult aside, how do you feel about like other Goldango variants in general?
I
Whether it
like it
is
more than Dragapult. I think.
okay, but do you
Um,
still think it's probably C
I still
tier
think it's
just
C
in
tier.
general?
Yeah, I do. Again, like sees like I can make J2 with it and do well, and like we've seen like the undefeated streak with a Golden Go deck, and it matches up really well into a lot of these things. But notably, like Raging Bolt, I think feels like a bad matchup if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, it's
what was the meta?
that that
Or the
largely depends. So
okay,
that is variant dependent. And there's I know I didn't pull up his list, but Yella this weekend in Utrecht played a version of Goldango that was somewhat similar to the list that we took to Atlanta, where it played the Pidgeot, it played the Sarah Ledge, you played Briar,
okay,
and so that version in particular, I actually think is strong into Raging Bolt because you have the capability to go 1, 2, 3, or you have the ability to set the one prize board, and if they depending on what your opponent what your Raging Bolt opponent opts into, you have the opportunity to go 1, 2, 3 or 2, 2, 2 depending on how they open. Whereas with these other variants, whether it's the Dunsparce, Dragapult, whatever it is, you very often are forced to go 1, 2, 2, 2 or 1, 1, 2, 2, and they can typically do that better than you can.
yeah,
Like they can take 4 KOs better than the Goldango deck can.
yeah. Yeah, again, I don't think it like if you look at the decks above it, I don't feel like it has other than maybe the Dragapult, the straight Dragapult, like it has quite the matchup spread
Yeah.
going
Well,
against
and
others.
then the Dragapult decks have like the straight Pult decks have Genesect.
Yeah,
You're really bad into Flareon. Gardevoir
yeah,
has never been a super great matchup.
yeah. It's bad.
And then
Yeah,
the,
I
the
don't.
other the other thing that we haven't even talked about yet, when we could probably get to it now, is Joltik Box showed up, and Goldenko does not
Yeah,
do well into Pikachu.
no, it does not. You Pikachu with its Resolute Heart ability prevents you from being able to one shot it clean. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to get really like cheeky with Vengeful Punch or like a Rocky Helmet or something like that, and that feels pretty bad.
Yeah,
So I think Joltik Box has come on the scene really hard, really fast. It did really well the last few regionals. I mean, it had two make top cut at was it Brazil or
yeah.
uh,
Well, Chile, but
Chile? I keep saying Brazil. Sorry, Chile, South America. But I'm not a believer in this deck.
nope.
It feels like Raging Bolt 2.0 for this format. Like Raging Bolt is now a more sophisticated deck. It went to college. It got a good paying job. It settled down, had a family. But the offspring it produced was Joltik Box, and it's got a wild child for a son here. And I think I don't know, man. It's honestly you can't deny that it has power. It has the capability to do really well at a tournament to make top eights, but I think it stalls out hard after you get into day two. You
Yeah,
really have to get like pray that you get good matchups and that you have players that play into your strategies. Because if you get somebody that's like, well, okay, I see that you're going for this strategy. Let me just, feed you one prizers and then unfair stamp you and lock you down, or like bring up something and but do it. And if you don't have a way to, or what is it called?
Maractus.
Maractus it. Thank you. And if you don't have a way to like retreat with Latios and play, and I just Maractus you, good luck. you're not doing much, or you just you get unfair stamped or Iona to 2, and you don't have any draw power. You don't have any
Right.
onboard draw other than
Right.
Mew, and that's a real big liability right now. I think it's bottom of B tier.
Oh,
Maybe
see,
above Flareon, but go ahead.
I was actually going to put it in C
Yeah, I
because
don't
I
think.
I
Okay,
have zero faith in this deck whatsoever. Now, I would
this
still.
is like Raging Bolt all over again.
Well,
like,
it is in a
yeah,
way. In a way, like you said, a Raging Bolt has become a thinking man's deck nowadays, more or
yeah,
less. Like it's got decisions points, and you can actually make impactful choices throughout a game. You can't do that with Joltik Box. You said,
nah.
okay, did I open with a way to get Miraidon? Cool. I can go get Joltik and an attacker. Okay, do I have an energy? Cool. I can use Jolting Charge. Do I have a Crispin for next turn? Cool. Do I have a boss for the turn after that? Cool. Oh, my hand went away. What do I do now? And because you don't have access to something like Noctowl, you don't have Forest Sealstone
Mm-hmm.
anymore. You're just praying that you draw your resources in the correct order to maintain a game or board state to shut your opponent out of the game. And I think every single deck above it handles that very well and makes it to where I would not want to play this deck into a room that has any of these 5 decks in it. And
Yeah.
the other thing that people don't actually talk about with Joltik Box is even though you play a good number of energy, there are a number of games where you go second and you can't Jolting Charge on turn 1, and that feels horrible.
Fair. Yeah, it can be a really, really. It just feels like a luck based deck, like early Miraidon, where you had to run so many energies and stuff. It feels similar to that, where you're basically you're relying upon your draws. I mean, C makes sense from a empirical standpoint. I just think the only thing to counter, just to play devil's advocate, um, if you look at the conversion rates for all these decks, it's still at the very top of conversion, and I think the the raw power level, like the floor for Joltik Box, if you will, is a lot higher than a lot of these other decks.
Okay.
And like a Dragapult. Like I feel like if you're a newer player and you're playing Dragapult, you're able to get you're gonna get punished way more than if you were playing Joltik Box, if that makes sense. If you
Yeah,
make a
I could see
misplay.
that. But
So I guess looking at like if you're looking at the ability to do well with this deck, um, I don't know. I think B is you're going to make top cut. C is you're going to make day 2. So it is fair to say you put it all the way at the top. It has the highest conversion rate of all these decks in C tier. That makes sense too.
yeah, with that in mind, should Blissey actually go down to D tier?
You don't think you'll make day 2 with it?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
I like the deck, but yeah, I don't think right now if you hit like 1 or 2 bad matchups, I don't know. Like maybe me as a Dragapult player, I'm just scared to face into it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's fair.
anybody else is probably just like, oh great, free win.
Right.
So that's fair.
Let's close out the top 6 decks here with Terra Box. So we've seen some developments in the deck since the format first started. The format started off and the deck seemed like it was kind of fraudulent compared to what everyone expected coming into the Journey Together format. People have adjusted their deck lists. Other archetypes have had to adjust their deck lists, and Terra Box has been able to get itself to a point where it's started to see some success. We're seeing top cuts at events from it, and we're seeing multiple top cuts at events from it, including wins in admittedly some smaller scale events. But if you go look at like Wancho was able to take down an event with
Mm-hmm.
Terra Box. And so where do you think this deck falls in the current landscape?
I think it could still make top cut at a lot of events. So I think I'd put it probably below Flareon Noctowl. Um, in my mind, I think
Okay.
it's better than Joltik Box, and I think it can still be consistently good. It's come back around. People have stopped teching for it essentially, or trying to tech for it, and it has a lot of good tricks right now into all these different matchups. But I don't know. I think it's still really strong. I think it if you're a player that's skilled with it, you're able to allow for skill expression. I think Wellspring can be a trap a lot of times, but if you're able to avoid early Wellsprings and actually set up a good board state and like have good checkmate scenarios, this deck definitely checkmates with the best of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where I'd put it.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I think that I agree. I think the nice thing is that you don't have to include things like Cornerstone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's kind of pretty widely gotten off the Cornerstone train.
Yeah.
So all these decks aren't having to jam in a Cornerstone and a fighting energy to
Notably, we
compensate for
don't
that.
have walls on our tier list, if you will. So that's part of
Oh,
that.
I would put Walls in D tier. I still think it's
Yeah, me
bad.
too.
We saw a couple that made top 32 in Melbourne, but
Mhm.
the deck can't beat Gardevoir. It literally cannot beat Gardevoir. So
Yeah.
why are you playing it?
Yeah, maybe next format, if Marnie's Grimmsnarl drives away the Gardevoir, maybe it'll make a comeback. But until then, it's definitely a hard sell.
I'm pretty sure
Speaking
Walls
of,
loses to Marnie's Grimmsnarl for what it's worth.
oh
But
really?
I just don't see how does it win?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, if
Like you
you're
can't hit
building
with
up.
Cornerstone, but you just moved. You just set up 3 Monkey Dories on your bench, and you can Monkey Dory better than your opponent can. And you can also do the Frostlass, so you always have the Frostlass math to KO their Monkey Dory when they put it down.
That's fair. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I'd have to think it through and test it. Maybe,
Sure.
definitely. Yeah. Speaking of Frostlass Monkey
Yeah.
Dory and Marnie's, we're getting into the next format, but we're still talking about this format. We don't have Marnie's Grimmsnarl quite yet, but we still have this deck, except minus the Marnie's Grimmsnarl, if you will. I like this deck a lot. I still think it has a lot of like play potential, skill expression, but I don't think it's quite where it needs to be in order to like be a force in the metagame. I'd probably keep it in C tier for now.
Okay.
Probably right around the Goldengo Dragapult Goldengo, like right around there. Like yeah, probably right there.
See, I'd argue I can get behind C tier,
Okay.
even though I think that the biggest thing holding this deck back is play rate and the fact that it is. I think the floor for this deck is lower than like what you talked about before. I think that this deck, the floor for this deck is lower than the floor for Joltik Box. I think the ceiling for this deck is significantly higher than the ceiling for Joltik Box. And you have a lot of the best cards in the game, or the most annoying cards to deal with in the game, in the form of Monkey Dory, Maractus, you have Blood Moon, you have a lot of Ionos, you've got a lot of Badoo going on. And a lot of times that can either cause your opponent to misplay into something or cause your opponent to just not necessarily know. People probably don't practice this matchup very much, if
sure.
at all. And having to come up with that game plan on the fly is something that a lot of people are, not necessarily the best at doing. And so I would almost want to put this above Joltik Box, but it's kind of splitting hairs probably at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think if you gave a really, really talented player both of those decks, like, and made them play a whole regionals with it, I think the really, really talented player, given enough time to play test and like be comfortable with the deck, I agree. Like they would do better 90% of the time with Frostlass Monkey Dory than with Joltik Box. But then if you gave like a less experienced player both of those decks, yeah, they would bomb out with Frostlass, but then potentially still have the ability to make day two. It's really, I think, if you're looking at it like an aggregate data wise, like Frostlass Monkey Dory is going to have a lower win percentage than Joltik Box, but like if you look at like which one's going to go deeper in a tournament and potentially win, it probably is Frostlass Monkey Dory. So I guess if we're going to go like
it's like strength of play of the deck into Portland specifically.
Okay. Then I think, yeah, Frostlass Monkey Dory is a stronger play than Joltik Box. If you are saying, I've tested with both of these decks enough to feel really confident going into this tournament and feel like I have an advantage over my players playing both of these decks, I think that player playing Frostlass Monkey Dory is going to feel much more confident than the player playing Joltik Box.
Sure.
For sure.
Okay.
Again, I won't deny that.
Another low meta percentage play then would be this Roaring Moon to Dunsparce deck or Neutralization Zone deck. And where do you think this stacks up this week? Because I have an inkling that it's not very high.
I mean, if we see Dragapult starting to cut his stadiums, if we see a bit like the problem with that, if Dragapult cuts his stadiums, that's only one piece of the puzzle. You still have to account for all the other matchups. It's only like 2 decks out of the 9 that you might see, if that. Gardevoir still runs 2 Artisan. Raging Bolt definitely still runs the Tool Jammer with the
Yeah,
what is it called?
Bolt plays three
Plays 3 stadiums.
stadiums and
So
has the ability to attack with non-EXs anyway.
yeah, I don't I don't know. I don't love the deck. I feel like maybe I honestly haven't played a single game with it. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of I haven't even seen somebody play a game with it, if I'm honest. So I don't really have a strong opinion about it. I'd probably put it in D or C tier just to I think it's okay, but it fundamentally sound like using a one prizer to attack and do a decent amount of damage into 2 prizers has always been a good strategy in Pokemon. But beyond that, I don't really have a strong opinion. I'd probably put it in D tier right now,
Okay.
below Blissey if I had to even.
Oh,
I think
dang.
maybe above Blissey. I think it probably is a little bit better than Blissey.
I think notably, like we mentioned in Dragapult, even if they are cutting the stadiums, one neutralization zone does not prevent the damage counter placement on the bench from Phantom Dive, and Genesect also stops you from being able to play the stadium to begin with.
True. That's a good point.
So I straight Pult, and you may have issues anyway, and Dusknoir Pult may be able to pull off a big enough combo turn that they could still close out the game at the end of the day. But yeah, so last deck we have to talk about here would be Zoroark. And I think, interestingly, at the beginning of the format, we had a conversation about how the owners' decks were notably weaker, or we did not expect them to perform very well going into things. And that was very true for the very beginning of the format. But similarly to how we've seen Gardevoir rise up, how we've seen decks like Terravox have to adapt their game plan and their deck lists accordingly, I think Zoroark has also kind of done a pretty good job of reinventing itself and finding a foothold in the metagame. Now, I'm not going to claim that this is some super high tier, like just outside of A tier deck, but I do think that it's good, notably into Gardevoir, and is reasonably playable into Dragapult and Raging Bolt as well. And for that reason, I would say that I think this deck belongs in B tier.
Okay. Yeah, I could agree with that. I think we've seen enough success from it. It has a good matchup, like you said, into some of the top decks. It it's really limited by if you prize something like your Darmanitan and then can't find that other Darmanitan, it gets really tricky to set up and do damage like you want to do. And using a 2/2 line as you're attacking, it gets tough. Like I don't know.
Well, I mean that logic can be applied to like a lot of Dragapult lists
Sure.
only play 2 Dragapult. A lot of Guardy decks only play 2 Gardevoir.
That's a good point.
It can be just as debilitating for those deck to prize those things too.
I guess I've just seen it to where Zoroark gets more punished than those other decks.
That's
like
fair.
Maybe they have other ways to play around and take prizes, and then Zoroark just doesn't. Like you only have like it's you run a 4/4 Zoroark, but you can only attack with
what's on your bench.
3 Pokemon essentially.
Sure.
So if you can't get access to those 3 Pokemon early enough, it really starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
But and especially but I think like just having trade, having access to so many things, being able to spread damage now before Shaman comes into format, I think it's definitely proven itself to be the strongest of the owner decks that we've seen so far.
Definitely.
I don't think it'll. Unfortunately, this is a bummer. I don't think it'll do super well next format and then moving on. So if you're gonna play it, maybe this would be the tournament to do it. If it's your favorite deck, if you love Zoroark, and many people do, including myself, this would be the fun one to say like let's send it off into the sunset before Shaman comes in and ruins the party.
Yeah. So yeah, that's gonna close out our tier list. I think. Did you you happy with how everything landed here? Did you feel like we need to move anything around?
Fine. It's tough to say. I think this is maybe like my perception of it. And granted, like I said, I haven't played in a regionals in this format, and I've just been kind of a spectator for a lot of it. So I'm just basing this off of our opinions and some of our play, but not a whole lot. Not as much as some of the other people that might be making tier lists, but I'm happy with it. I think that it reflects a confidence that I can at least shove this out into the world and hopefully not get ridiculed too hard about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think if it was fully my personal opinions, I would probably move a couple of things around.
Sure.
Like notably, I know you like this deck, this Dragable Dusknoir.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of it, and I think that it honestly is probably a C tier deck where like yes, you can
Oh,
play it and you could do okay with it, but I
wow.
do not think that you should reasonably expect to do well with it.
Okay.
I also potentially would move Flareon up into A tier as well
Okay.
this week in particular because
All right.
I expect Raging Bolt to be popular. I think Dragapult is going to be very popular, and I think um, like you mentioned, and Zoroark has seen an uptick. I think that we could expect it to see a good amount of play this weekend as well. The big question mark is obviously going to be the Gardevoir percentage. So
Right.
if it's way up, obviously it's not an A tier play. If Gardevoir's not way up, the
Right.
viability of this deck goes up significantly.
Well, you were saying earlier, if I'll remind you, that you thought Gardevoir would be the number 2 deck this weekend.
I know,
I know
but
you're.
all
This
but all
is
the
your
ends
pet deck.
all
We're all
the
just right. We're all just
all the end
cheering for our
Zoroarks are
decks we
going to
love.
show. All the end Zoroarks are going to
Ah,
show up,
I
and
see.
They're going to push all the Gardevoirs down to the bottom tables.
Smells like cope to me. Just.
Probably, you're probably right. You're probably right. Yeah,
This is why
I
it's
think.
nice to have somebody balance you out. Otherwise your own echo chamber becomes just like a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, that's the tier list. That's the last thing we had going for us for this episode, and I think we've just about overstayed our welcome once
Yeah.
again, as we are very apt to do. So, with that, I think John and I are going to close out the show. If you are interested in following the show or either of us, you can find us on social media. I'll have the link to all of those channels in the description of the episode, both on Spotify and on YouTube. If you are not following the show on whatever platform you're listening on, please consider doing so. We would really appreciate either a subscription on YouTube or a follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And leaving a rating or review would also be super appreciated because it helps other people find the show. We'll have some other news, maybe some first impressions for Destined Rivals games, or decks rather, coming out next week. But we will definitely be coming at you with the results of the upcoming Portland Regionals and any other happenings that happen over the weekend. So, John, any other final thoughts before we say
Um,
goodbye?
yeah, just good luck to those that are playing in Portland. Good luck to the judges. Hope everything runs smoothly. Portland's a cool city, and especially this time of year, it's a really nice place to be. So hopefully everybody gets to enjoy the nice Pacific Northwest vibes for the weekend. And yeah, we'll catch you all next week. Hopefully you have a good weekend, good Memorial Day weekend. Be safe, have fun, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds great. We will see you guys next week.
See you.